The world doesn't last forever, a sentence I always used to hear from my late father, and I remembered it while standing in front of a picture hanging on the wall. It was a picture of Sophia. I stood in front of it, blaming myself, talking to her as if she were still standing in front of me. "Forgive me, Sophia. Forgive me. I didn't realize your worth until you were gone. I treated you poorly, and I always came at you, but I swear no one will love you like I did after you left. I can't find a companion. You were my companion in this world, and I didn't know that the end of this road would be my end. If I had known, I wouldn't have returned to this misery. But I go back and say, these are lifetimes." Tears fell from my eyes. I'm not someone who cries easily. I've been a tough man all my life. I never shed tears for anyone, but Sophia's death broke me. Sophia was my life's companion and everything to me in this world. The state of grief I was in was interrupted by the ringing of my phone. It was Mr. Leo, the school principal, calling to inform me that I had a job starting today. I answered and spoke to him. He asked where I was and said he was waiting for me at the school to hand over my duties. I knew I had worked there before, but the situation was different now. He advised me not to be late, and I assured him I'd be there in less than 15 minutes. I hung up, muttering to myself that he would probably give me a hard time, saying things were different now and asking me to do more than before. I entered my room, opened the closet, and took out my clothes, put it on, and headed to the school. It was an elementary school where I had spent many days before leaving because the cost of living had risen, and my salary there wasn't enough to make ends meet. But now the situation was different. Salaries had increased, and life was expected to improve. When I arrived at the school, I found Mr. Leo waiting for me. He welcomed me and took me on a tour of the school, which I expected to have been renovated. But unfortunately, it looked very old, almost like an abandoned school. Mr. Leo took me to a room next to the school gate and told me that this room was mine. It had a bed and some kitchen supplies in case I wanted to make tea or something. The window overlooked the school gate. In the past, this room didn't exist, and I used to work until 7 p.m., then walk home. But now things were different. The school guard was visible, and I was assured that I could go home during holidays and rest. Mr. Leo left the room, and the school day began. Like any other school day, the students took their classes and left. After everyone had gone, I started checking the classrooms and locking the doors. The place was very quiet until I saw someone running down the stairs. I shouted, asking who was running there, but no one answered. I moved towards the movement I had seen, but found no one. I thought it must be my imagination and went back to checking the classrooms. As I passed the last classroom, I saw something strange. A teacher sitting inside who hadn't left. He was holding his head and crying. I approached him, asking why he was still there when all the other teachers had left. He looked up at me, and my blood froze. I stood in front of him, unable to speak. It was Mr. Henry, a teacher who had worked at the school years ago and had committed suicide by jumping from the 5th floor. I still remember the incident and what was said at the time, that Mr. Henry had found out his wife was cheating on him and that his children were not his. Being a weak man, he couldn't confront her or seek justice, but no matter what, he shouldn't have taken his own life. I was snapped out of my thoughts by Mr. Henry's voice telling me to forget about the past. He claimed he wasn't alive and that his soul was trapped in the school since the day he was killed. He said that the person who had framed him and made him doubt his wife was the reason he committed suicide. He wanted me to find out who that person was and expose the truth. After he finished speaking, he disappeared. I left the classroom and informed Mr. Leo about what had happened. He was silent for a while, then told me to cover myself well while sleeping, as I looked tired. I was devastated and told him I had seen Mr. Henry at the school after he had died. He called me crazy and said that Mr. Shockey had been dead for years. I insisted that I had seen him, Mr. Leo telling me to forget about what I had seen. He said that if I kept talking about it, people would think I was crazy. I told him I wasn't lying, but he insisted that I was hallucinating due to the grief of losing my wife. He left and I continued my work. Later I heard a scream and saw Mr. Leo being thrown from above, landing dead in front of me. I looked up and saw Mr. Henry standing and smiling. The man was drenched in blood, clearly not intending to seek justice. In the midst of my confusion, I felt a hand hitting my shoulder, telling me to wake up. I found Mr. Leo still standing in front of me. I looked at the ground, but there was no body, no one dead. I thanked God that it was all just a hallucination. Mr. Leo T spoke, saying he would go upstairs to check the classrooms himself and see Mr. Henry, who was supposedly still alive. Despite the insult from Mr. Leo and the age difference between us, I was grateful that everything I had seen was just a hallucination. I decided to sleep, still depressed, and was about to return to my room when I heard a scream so loud it made me fall to the ground. I got up quickly and ran towards the source of the scream, which came from the 5th floor. I reached the classroom where Mr. Henry had been, but I froze at what I saw. Mr. Leo was lying on the ground. I approached him to see what was wrong, and I wish I hadn't. Mr. Leo's throat was slit, a horrifying sight. I stepped back screaming, "Oh, what a black day! What a black day! What have you done?" I quickly left the classroom, not knowing how to react. I ran downstairs, my body trembling. I wasn't afraid of anything, and I had seen a lot in my life, but not to this extent. I thought about calling the police, but there was no one else in the school except me and Mr. Leo. This meant one of two things. Either Mr. Leo had committed suicide, or I had killed him, but I swear I didn't touch him. I found him dead. Could there be demons killing people? To my knowledge, no, that couldn't happen. I was going crazy and didn't know how to act. After thinking for a long time, for about 2 hours, I had no choice but to call the police. I took my phone and called them, reporting Mr. Leo's death. Less than an hour later, the police arrived. One of them greeted me saying, "Good evening, I'm Captain Adam. Are you the one who reported the incident?" I replied, "Yes, sir, I'm Jack, the school guard." He asked where the body was, and I told him it was on the top floor. The officer moved toward the top floor, and I followed him with 2 soldiers. We reached the classroom, and the officer approached and saw the body. After that, everything turned upside down. The whole country knew what had happened. The forensic lab and the prosecution arrived, and after the examination, an ambulance took the body away. The prosecutor asked me if I was the school guard who had reported the crime. I confirmed, and he asked who else was present besides me when the crime occurred. I told him no one was there except me. I explained that I had called Mr. Leo because I was seeing strange things at the school. He asked what kind of strange things, and I told him about Mr. Henry, who had died years ago by suicide, jumping from the top floor. I said I had seen him today, just as I was telling him, in the same classroom where Mr. Leo was killed. At first, Mr. Leo told me I was old and senile, but then he went to check the classrooms, and I heard him scream. When I went up, I found him like this. The prosecutor asked if I was drinking anything, and I said no, only smoking cigarettes. He asked why he was asking, and I said it was because no one would believe what I was saying. I swore that I wasn't lying, but he remained silent for a while, then called Captain Adam and told him to take me to the station and keep me in custody for the night, to be presented to him the next day. I was shocked and asked why, but he said we would find out tomorrow if I had done it or not. I knew this would happen, but I swear I was innocent. I didn't kill anyone. We arrived at the station, and I was thrown into a cell. It was my first time in jail. I prayed to God to get me out of this situation, and despite everything, I fell asleep. I opened my eyes to find myself in a strange house that looked old. Mr. Henry entered, looking upset and literally crying. He sat for a while, then got up, took a knife, and entered the room like a madman. There was a woman on the bed, presumably his wife. He raised the knife and struck her repeatedly until she died. Then he snapped out of it and fell next to the bed, leaning against the wall and crying. The knife fell from his hand, and he couldn't believe what he had done. He got up, entered the next room, and started removing the tiles, digging a hole. After making a large hole, he brought his wife's body from the other room and buried her, covering it with dirt and replacing the tiles as they were. The scene changed, and I found Mr. Henry sitting in the school, looking confused and sad. Suddenly, he got up, holding a letter, opened the teacher's room door, approached the window, and jumped. I woke up gasping for air and found a police officer waking me up saying, "Come on, Jack, you're being transferred to the prosecution." I got up with the officer, and they took me to the prosecution. As soon as I entered, the prosecutor started interrogating me, wanting to know exactly what had happened that day and if there was any previous conflict between me and Mr. Leo. I told him everything that had happened. He replied saying that I claimed Mr. Leo had yelled at me because I called him and told him about these things, and then he went to check the classrooms. He mentioned that I didn't respond to him because he was like a father to me. The prosecutor said, "Excuse me, Mr. Jack. According to your ID, you're 55 years old and the victim was 40. How is he like your father?" I apologized, saying I was an ignorant man who didn't calculate these things, but in our country, older people are respected. He didn't respect me and called me senile, saying that my wife's death had affected me. I was upset and decided to kill him. I said, "No, sir, I didn't kill him. I found him like this and don't know how it happened." The prosecutor said my legal situation was very bad and he wanted to help me, but I wasn't helping myself. He wrote, "We have decided to detain the accused, Jack, for 15 days pending investigation, with the possibility of renewal as per the legal deadline. We will expedite the forensic and autopsy reports from the responsible authorities." I was taken back to jail. I was going crazy trying to prove my innocence, but didn't know how. I stayed in jail for a day or two until the prosecutor summoned me again. He said the report had come in my favor. The murder weapon found in the classroom had the victim's fingerprints on it, and the forensic report confirmed that the victim had committed suicide, evident from the knife wound in Mr. Leo's neck. "Therefore, Jack, you are free to go and can even return to your job." He wrote, "We have decided to release the accused, Jack, from the prosecution's custody, provided he is not wanted in other cases." I left the prosecution and returned home, feeling extremely tired. I threw myself on the bed and fell asleep. The next day, I returned to the school very calmly and found out that the administration had appointed a new principal, Mr. James. No one talked to me about anything, and I didn't give anyone a chance to talk. I stayed in my room throughout the school day, only coming out to lock the classroom doors after everyone had left. One day at 10 p.m., I heard knocking on the school gate. I was surprised who would come at such an hour. When I approached the gate, I saw a young man in his 20s. He spoke saying, "No offense, it seems I woke you up. Do you have some tea?" I asked who he was, and he said, "I'm Jacob, working at the farm next door. I'm a security guard like you." I said, "Okay, welcome. Just a moment, I'll get you some tea." Before I moved, he asked me a question that froze me in place. He said, "Have you met Mr. Henry, and did he tell you the truth?" Before I could answer, I saw the top floor of the school lit up. I looked at it and saw that he was still standing there, not noticing the light on the top floor. I approached him asking, "How do you know about Mr. Henry and what truth are you talking about?" He said, "It's not just me. The whole town knows about Mr. Henry's story, and everyone knows what you said in the investigations. What do you want now? Did you come for tea or to find out what happened? Besides, Mr. Henry has been dead for years, and you're still young. How do you know about him?" My father, Lucas, was the guard of this farm back then and was present at the time of Mr. Henry's death. He told me everything that happened at that time. I noticed Jacob's gaze shift to the floor above, and I asked, "What's wrong, son? Is there someone upstairs?" He said, "Of course. Who else would be in the school besides him?" I looked behind me and indeed saw someone looking from above. But since I knew what was going on, I didn't let it bother me and said, "Don't worry, there's nothing there. But I want to know what your father..." Jacob said, "Okay, but let's sit outside the school gate so I can keep an eye on the farm gate." I agreed, and we sat on a small bench in front of the school. Jacob started telling me everything he had heard from his father. He said the school principal back then was a man named Mark, who was the older brother of Mr. Leo. Mark was not a good person, and no one liked him. At the same time, there was a teacher at the school named Luna, who was very beautiful and came from a respectable family. From the moment Mark saw her, he was infatuated with her. I forgot to mention that Mark was a womanizer and also drank, but this was outside the school. Inside the school, he was the respectable principal, and only a few people in the town knew about his vices. My father was one of those people. He used to see Mark looking at the female teachers with lustful eyes, but Zainab was a straightforward woman who didn't engage in any flirtation or nonsense. Because of this, she completely ignored his advances. Then Mr. Henry appeared, a respectable man from a good family who genuinely loved her, without any inappropriate behavior or words. He decided to propose to her, and she agreed. He met her family and asked for her hand in marriage, and they got married. But Mark didn't give up. He tried to tarnish her reputation in any way possible. At that time, his brother, the devil in human form, named Ivan, suggested to him that doubt could destroy any family and any home. If he wanted to end their relationship, he should plant doubt in Henry's mind. Mark and Ivan thought that once Henry doubted his wife, he would divorce her, and then Mark could get to her. They managed to plant a letter in Luna's bag, written by an unknown person, containing strange words. At the same time, they had people spread rumors about Luna, saying bad things about her, which made Henry doubt his wife and her behavior. But she was confident that Henry would never doubt her. Then Henry received a phone call from someone who told him that his wife knew someone and met him when she couldn't meet Henry, and that this person sent her love letters. Henry's doubt increased, and he decided to search his wife's bag and closet. The shock came when he actually found a letter in her bag. He went crazy, unable to believe that his wife was cheating on him. Consumed by doubt, he killed his wife and buried her in a room in their house. After finishing everything, he reported her disappearance. The next day at school, he found out the truth when he overheard a teacher talking on the phone, confirming to Mark that the plan had worked because Luna hadn't come to school that day, and Henry seemed very angry, which meant he had seen the letter. At that moment, Henry realized he had wronged his wife. He couldn't bear it and wasn't strong enough to confront the situation, so he jumped from the window and committed suicide. But before he did, he wrote a letter explaining everything. By a twist of fate, Mr. Leo wanted to renovate the school, so he took out many papers from the storage room in front of the school. As I told you, fate played its role, and the letter fell from the pile at my father's feet while he was sitting in front of the farm gate. At that time, my father couldn't believe what he was reading, and when I grew up, he told me everything that had happened. What happened to Leo was undoubtedly revenge from Henry's spirit. This story is strange, son, but if it really happened, then justice has been served, and the spirit has taken its revenge. But I don't understand what Henry wants from me now. He doesn't want anything from you. You've already done what he wanted by bringing Mr. Leo here and allowing Henry's spirit to take its revenge. But I didn't intend for Leo to die, and I didn't know the whole story. I only knew that the person who ran the school back then was named Mark and that he was Mark's older brother, but I didn't know the story you told me. No one knew, and as I said, fate played its role, and the letter ended up at my father's feet. If you still don't believe me, Mr. Jack, here's the letter. Read it to confirm what I've said. He handed me the letter and I looked at it. I may be an ignorant man, but I can read and write to some extent, and indeed everything Jacob had told me was correct. Perhaps I returned here so that Henry's spirit could rest and get its revenge. Xerenia, Mr. Henry, and his wife, and that will be the end of our story today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you soon in a new story from Dot. If you've made it this far, I hope you enjoyed the exciting events, and I thank Mark very much for this wonderful story. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, share the video with your friends, and don't forget to like it. Thank you.